France, 1943. While the world burned in war, a small convent in the French countryside became an unlikely battlefield. This is the true story of how a group of nuns turned their kitchen into a weapon against the Nazi occupation. What happened inside those sacred walls would become one of the most daring espionage operations of World War II, and the SS officer who ordered them to cook had no idea what they were really preparing. Winter arrived early in the village of Sainte-Marie that year. The snow fell thick and silent, covering the cobblestone streets and the ancient stone walls of the convent that had stood for 300 years. But the peace that once filled these halls was gone. German trucks rolled through the iron gates, their engines shattering the morning prayers. Soldiers in black uniforms marched into the chapel, their boots echoing where only whispers had been heard before. The swastika flag was raised over the bell tower, and Hauptsturmführer Klaus Weber stepped out of his staff car, surveying his new headquarters with cold satisfaction. Mother Angelique stood in the courtyard, her hands folded inside her habit, her face calm despite the fear gripping her heart. She was 58 years old, and she had led this community of 12 nuns for nearly 2 decades. She had weathered storms, disease, and poverty, but nothing had prepared her for this. Weber approached her, his leather coat gleaming with melted snow. He spoke in broken French, his voice sharp and commanding. The convent would serve as a rest station for SS officers traveling between occupied territories. The nuns would remain, but they would work. They would clean, they would serve, and above all, they would cook. Any resistance, any defiance, would be met with immediate execution. Mother Angelique nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his. She understood perfectly. That first night, as the German soldiers settled into the dormitories that had once housed young novices, Mother Angelique gathered her sisters in the basement kitchen. Sister Claire, barely 23 years old, was trembling. Sister Marguerite, the eldest at 67, sat with her weathered hands clasped in prayer. The others waited in silence, their faces pale in the candlelight. Mother Angelique spoke quietly but firmly. They had 2 choices: submit completely and become servants of the occupation, or find a way to resist from within. The risk was death, but doing nothing was its own kind of death. She looked at each face, waiting. One by one, the sisters nodded. They would resist. The plan began small, almost invisible. For weeks, the nuns simply observed. They learned the routines of the German garrison, the comings and goings of officers, the schedules of patrols. Sister Claire, tasked with delivering meals to the soldiers, noticed that couriers arrived every Tuesday and Friday, carrying sealed documents to Weber's office. Lieutenant Hans Müller, a young officer with watchful eyes, seemed to pay more attention than the others, often walking the halls at odd hours. Sister Marguerite, working in the kitchen, realized that supply trucks came from the same depot every Thursday morning. Every detail was noted, every pattern memorized. But observation alone was not enough. They needed to act. The breakthrough came through Father Michel, the village priest who still had permission to visit the convent for Sunday Mass. He was part of the local resistance network, a loose collection of farmers, shopkeepers, and former soldiers who gathered intelligence and aided Allied operations. When Mother Angelique confided in him during confession, he was stunned, but immediately understood the opportunity. The convent was now a hub of German military activity. Information gathered here could save lives, disrupt operations, and aid the Allied advance. But how could the nuns communicate with the resistance without arousing suspicion? The answer came from the most unlikely place, the kitchen. Sister Marguerite had been preparing meals for the German officers for 3 weeks when she noticed something. The soldiers rarely inspected the food itself. They cared about quantity and taste, not preparation. She brought the idea to Mother Angelique late one night. What if they used the food deliveries to pass messages? The convent still received supplies from local farmers, many of whom were sympathetic to the resistance. If they could hide messages in the packaging, in the layers of paper and cloth that wrapped the ingredients, they could create a communication channel right under the Germans' noses. It was dangerous, almost insane, but it might work. The first message was sent on a cold morning in December. Sister Claire wrapped a small note in wax paper, describing the arrival times of German couriers and the number of vehicles in the motor pool. She folded it inside a loaf of bread that was being returned to the local baker as part of a regular exchange. Her hands shook as she handed the basket to the delivery boy, a teenager named Philippe, who worked for the resistance without knowing the full scope of his role. The note reached Father Michel by noon. By evening, the information had been radioed to a resistance cell 20 kilometers away. The operation had begun. Over the following months, the system became more sophisticated. Messages were hidden in the seams of flour sacks, rolled inside empty wine bottles tucked between layers of cheese wrapped in cloth. The nuns developed a simple code based on recipes. A request for more salt meant increased German activity. A note about needing fresh herbs indicated the arrival of high-ranking officers. A mention of spoiled meat warned of upcoming raids or patrols. The kitchen became a hub of intelligence gathering, and the nuns became spies. But intelligence alone was not enough. The resistance needed real-time communication, especially as Allied bombing campaigns intensified and coordination became critical. Father Michel approached Mother Angélique with a bold proposal. Smuggle a radio transmitter into the convent. It was a massive risk. If discovered, everyone would be executed immediately, but the potential value was enormous. Mother Angélique prayed for 3 days before agreeing. The question was how to bring it in and where to hide it. The solution came through Sister Thérèse, a quiet nun in her 40s who had worked as a telegraph operator before joining the convent. She knew Morse code and basic radio operation. If they could get the equipment inside, she could operate it. The plan was audacious. The transmitter would be disassembled into small components and smuggled in piece by piece, hidden inside supply deliveries. The final hiding place would be the kitchen itself, concealed inside a large iron stove that was rarely used. The transmissions would be disguised by the noise and steam of cooking, making detection nearly impossible. The operation took 6 weeks. Components arrived hidden in sacks of flour, wrapped in oilcloth and buried deep in the grain. Wires came coiled inside wheels of cheese. The antenna was smuggled in as part of a broken fence post. Sister Marguerite coordinated the kitchen schedule to ensure the right nuns were present during deliveries, while Sister Claire distracted the guards with extra servings of food and polite conversation. Slowly, piece by piece, the radio took shape in the hidden compartment behind the stove's firebox. The first transmission was sent on a freezing January night. Sister Thérèse crouched in the dim kitchen, her fingers trembling as she tapped out the Morse code. Mother Angélique stood watch by the door, listening for footsteps. Sister Marguerite kept a pot of soup boiling on the stove, the steam and bubbling masking any sound. The message was brief. German troop movements, supply routes, and the location of a fuel depot 5 kilometers north. The transmission lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was done, Sister Thérèse quickly disassembled the equipment and hid it back inside the stove. They had done it. The convent was now an active espionage station, but success brought new dangers. Lieutenant Müller had begun to notice irregularities. Supplies seemed to disappear too quickly. The nuns spent an unusual amount of time in the kitchen, even when no cooking was scheduled. He mentioned his concerns to Weber, but the Hauptsturmführer dismissed them. The nuns were devout, obedient, and terrified. They posed no threat. Still, Müller watched. He began making unannounced inspections, walking through the kitchen at random hours, checking storage rooms and questioning the sisters about their activities. The nuns adapted, becoming even more cautious, but the pressure was mounting. The crisis came in early March. A resistant sabotage operation went wrong, and the Germans launched a brutal crackdown. Homes were searched, suspects were arrested, and several resistance members were executed in the village square. Weber was furious, convinced that someone in the area was feeding information to the enemy. He ordered increased security at the convent and assigned Müller to conduct a thorough investigation. The nuns knew they were running out of time. Mother Angélique made a decision. They would continue operating, but they needed to be smarter. Instead of regular transmissions, they would send information only when it was critical. They would vary their methods using different hiding spots and communication channels. and they would give Miller something to find, a small controlled discovery that would satisfy his suspicions without exposing the real operation. Sister Claire volunteered. She would be caught with a minor infraction, something that seemed like petty resistance but was ultimately harmless. The plan worked. Miller discovered Sister Claire hiding a small French flag in her room, a symbolic act of defiance that was technically forbidden, but not a serious offense. He reported it to Weber, who ordered Claire confined to her quarters for a week. The punishment was harsh enough to seem legitimate, but mild enough to avoid execution. Miller, satisfied that he had found the source of the irregularities, relaxed his vigilance. The nuns breathed a collective sigh of relief and resumed their work. Spring arrived, and with it came news that changed everything. The Allies were planning a major offensive, and intelligence from occupied France was more valuable than ever. The resistance asked the convent to increase its reporting, focusing on German reinforcements, supply lines, and defensive preparations. The nuns agreed, knowing the risks, but understanding the stakes. Sister Thérèse began transmitting twice a week, always at night, always under the cover of kitchen noise. The information they provided helped Allied planners identify weak points in German defenses and target supply convoys. Lives were being saved, and the tide of war was slowly turning. But Weber was not a fool. Reports from the front indicated that the Allies had unusually accurate intelligence about German movements in the region. He suspected a spy network, and he was determined to find it. In late April, he announced a new security measure. All civilians in the area, including the nuns, would be subject to random searches and interrogations. The convent would be inspected weekly, and any suspicious activity would be investigated immediately. The walls were closing in. Mother Angelique called an emergency meeting. They had three options: stop the operation and hope they had not been compromised, continue and risk discovery, or attempt one final decisive act that could deliver a major blow to the German occupation before shutting down. The debate was intense. Sister Marguerite argued for caution. Sister Claire insisted they had to keep fighting. Sister Thérèse pointed out that the radio could be discovered at any moment during a search. In the end, Mother Angelique made the call. They would attempt one last operation, something so bold that it would justify all the risks they had taken. The opportunity came in early May. Weber received orders to host a gathering of senior SS officers from across the region. It would be a celebration, a show of strength and unity among the occupation forces. The event would take place at the convent, and the nuns would prepare the feast. Over 30 high-ranking officers would be present, including a general from Berlin. It was the perfect target. If the resistance could know the exact time, location, and attendees of this meeting, they could coordinate an operation to disrupt it, capture key intelligence, or even eliminate multiple enemy commanders in one strike. The nuns went to work. Sister Marguerite planned an elaborate menu that would require days of preparation, giving them cover for extended time in the kitchen. Sister Claire coordinated with Father Michel to ensure the resistance was ready to act on the intelligence. Sister Thérèse prepared the radio for a detailed transmission that would include names, ranks, arrival times, and the layout of the gathering. Mother Angelique oversaw every detail, knowing that one mistake could doom them all. The days before the event were a blur of activity. German soldiers cleaned and decorated the Great Hall. Supplies poured in. Wine from Paris, meat from local farms, vegetables from the surrounding countryside. The nuns worked from dawn until midnight, preparing dishes, setting tables, and serving the arriving officers. Through it all, they gathered information. Sister Claire memorized faces and ranks. Sister Marguerite noted security details and guard rotations. Sister Thérèse prepared her final transmission. The night before the banquet, the convent was a hive of activity. Officers drank and laughed in the hall, their voices echoing through the stone corridors. In the kitchen, the nuns worked in tense silence. At midnight, when the noise upstairs was at its peak, Sister Thérèse sent the transmission. It was the longest and most detailed message they had ever sent, a complete breakdown of the event, the attendees, and the security arrangements. The resistance received it and immediately began planning. The nuns had done their part. Now they could only wait. The banquet itself was a surreal experience. The great hall, once a place of prayer and contemplation, was filled with Nazi officers in full uniform, their medals gleaming in the candlelight. Weber presided over the gathering, proud and confident, toasting the strength of the Reich and the inevitable victory to come. The nuns moved silently among the tables, serving food and wine, their faces expressionless. Mother Angélique watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart pounding. Somewhere out there, the resistance was moving into position. The information had been sent. The trap was set. But nothing happened that night. The banquet concluded without incident. The officers left the following morning, satisfied and oblivious. Weber congratulated Mother Angélique on the excellent service, even hinting that the convent might be rewarded for its cooperation. The nuns returned to their routines, exhausted and confused. Had the transmission failed? Had the resistance decided not to act? Days passed with no word, and the uncertainty was agonizing. Then, 2 weeks later, Father Michel arrived with news. The resistance had not attacked the banquet itself. Instead, they had used the intelligence to track the officers as they left, identifying their routes and schedules. Over the following days, 3 separate convoys were ambushed. 2 high-ranking officers were captured, along with critical documents detailing German defensive plans for the region. A fuel depot was destroyed, and a communications hub was sabotaged. The operation was a stunning success, and it had all been made possible by the information gathered at the convent. The nuns had struck a blow that would echo across the entire occupation. But victory came with a price. The German response was swift and brutal. Investigations were launched, suspects were rounded up, and the entire region was placed under martial law. Weber, humiliated by the intelligence failures, became paranoid and ruthless. He ordered increased surveillance of everyone, including the nuns. Müller, convinced that the convent was somehow involved, began a new round of inspections. The nuns knew their time was running out. Mother Angélique made the hardest decision of her life. They would dismantle the operation immediately. The radio was disassembled and its components hidden in separate locations around the convent. The message system was shut down. All evidence of their activities was destroyed or concealed. They would return to being simple nuns, obedient and invisible, and pray that their work had been enough. It was a bitter end, but it was the only way to survive. The final weeks of the occupation were tense and terrifying. Miller continued his investigations, but he found nothing. The nuns maintained their routines, their faces calm, their secrets buried deep. Then, in June, the news came. The Allies had landed in Normandy. The invasion had begun. Within weeks, German forces were in retreat, and the occupation of Sainte-Marie was coming to an end. On a warm morning in August, the last German trucks rolled out of the convent gates. Weber left without a word, his face grim and defeated. The nuns stood in the courtyard, watching the soldiers disappear down the road. When the last vehicle was out of sight, Mother Angélique allowed herself to breathe. They had survived, they had resisted, and they had won. The story of what happened at Sainte-Marie remained secret for many years. The nuns never spoke of it, bound by their vows and their desire to return to a life of peace. But in the archives of the French resistance, the operation was recorded under a code name, Le Repas des Ombres, the Banquet of Shadows. It was a testament to courage, ingenuity, and the power of ordinary people to resist tyranny. The SS officer had ordered the nuns to cook, but what they really prepared was something far more dangerous: hope, resistance, and the seeds of liberation. If you enjoyed this story of courage and resistance, subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories from World War II. Hit the like button and leave a comment telling us what you think. History is full of heroes who never sought recognition, and we're here to make sure their stories are never forgotten.